Zohar Dvash is an Israeli educator, activist, and educational entrepreneur whose work centers on redefining the homeroom teacher as a community leader and strengthening teachers' professional status. With experience as a homeroom teacher, curriculum developer, and member of pedagogical innovation teams, she has contributed to project-based learning models and large-scale educational initiatives, including a citywide early childhood framework in Herzliya. She has served as a content developer and facilitator for Teach First Israel, advancing teacher empowerment and professional development. Dvash is also a prominent advocate for women educators, having founded a national movement to elevate teachers' status, led public demonstrations for fair compensation, and organized collaborative planning and policy discussions. She initiated specialized professional development programs for female teachers in partnership with the Ministry of Education. Holding degrees in behavioral sciences and cultural anthropology from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, she promotes an educational philosophy that treats classrooms as genuine communities, balancing individual needs with collective responsibility. For her master thesis, she did fieldwork in 2 rainbow gatherings. One was a small local gathering in Israel, a 3-day visit, sometime shortly before 2008, and the other was an international European rainbow gathering in Serbia in the summer of 2008, where she stayed for 3 weeks. This 2011 thesis, A Postmodern Communal Bubble Without a Common Denominator, The Rainbow, explores how community works inside rainbow gatherings, temporary spiritual ecological camps inspired by the 1960s hippie movement. Through fieldwork in Israel and Serbia, interviews, and analysis of online rainbow networks, the study examines 2 big questions. 1. How individuals maintain full personal freedom while still cooperating as a group, and 2. How group boundaries form in a community that claims to include everyone. The thesis argues that rainbow gatherings manage to create a functioning social order, without leaders, rules, or enforcement, through shared rituals, shared meals, emotional solidarity, and a strong contrast between Babylon, mainstream society, and the idealized rainbow world. It concludes that rainbow gatherings operate like a postmodern, temporary, self-created tribal bubble, offering participants a sense of belonging and community that dissolves once the gathering ends. In Hippie Undercover, the author describes how she first fell in love with the idea of rainbow gatherings after reading a newspaper article. The piece painted rainbow as a kind of green island outside normal life, people living for a month in remote nature without electricity, singing, loving, and doing as they wish as long as they don't hurt others. She drank in the description, dreamed of being there, and then, like many daydreams, let it fade because she didn't know how to reach that world. Years later, when she had to choose a thesis topic, a close friend who was a rainbow regular told her stories from the gatherings and reignited the fantasy. She went to a small gathering in Israel to check it out and immediately felt that this was the place she wanted to study. She admits that the decision was driven less by dry academic logic, and more by a strong personal pull toward freedom, hugs, songs, spirituality, and a life very different from the structured academic path she'd chosen. Rainbow became a way to combine 2 sides of herself, the wandering, anti-framework hippie and the ambitious academic. For a while she managed to be a hippie undercover, dancing and taking part in rituals on the outside, while quietly taking notes and shaping a thesis on the inside. In The Rainbow she shifts from her inner conflict to a vivid personal scene that shows what rainbow feels like. She recalls arriving at the big international gathering in Serbia. Strangers from all over the world noticed her walking down toward the main circle, opened their arms, hugged her, and whispered in her ear, "Welcome home, sister." From there she unpacks the name rainbow and all its associations, the rainbow after the biblical flood, new beginnings, the LGBTQ rainbow flag, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, to show how the movement is wrapped in symbols of hope, equality, and magic. She notes that almost every rainbow person she talks to repeats the same line, "You can't really explain what rainbow is," a mantra that keeps the gathering slightly mysterious and utopian, even though her own first contact was a very concrete newspaper description of a month-long, electricity-free camp in nature. Finally, she reflects on the ethnographic problem this creates. Rainbow doesn't push the researcher away or mark her as an outsider. Everyone belongs, so she herself has to draw the line between being inside as a sister and outside as an anthropologist. That tension, and its eventual cracks during and after Serbia, becomes part of the story the thesis tells, how her personal rainbow dream broke apart and was rebuilt into an academic understanding of this postmodern community. The introduction explains that the thesis investigates large, temporary spiritual ecological gatherings in nature, known as rainbow gatherings, which are the main expression of the Rainbow Family movement, a New Age-style, anti-establishment offshoot of the 1960s American hippie scene. It outlines the movement's origins in the first rainbow gathering in Colorado in 1972, created as an alternative to commercialized festivals that had lost their original spirit, and describes how this modest 4-day event unexpectedly evolved into a recurring, international phenomenon. The author frames her core research questions around what happens socially inside these gatherings. What holds together a group of strangers who behave like a close-knit community? What motivates their cooperation? What defines the boundaries of this temporary society? And what becomes of these ties once the gathering ends? She situates the study within broader anthropological concerns about community, solidarity, and social order in contemporary postmodern life. In the methodology, a multi-sited fieldwork in a tribal landscape section, the author explains that her research is based on 3 complementary methods. 1. Participant observation at 2 rainbow gatherings, a 3-day small gathering in Israel, and a 3-week international European gathering in Serbia in summer 2008, where she lived on site, ate in the food circles, did daily chores, joined workshops, spoke with many participants informally, and even convened a talking circle herself. 2. 7 semi-structured interviews with participants outside the gatherings, mostly Israelis face-to-face, and 2 European/New Zealand participants by email, to understand how they experience their lives beyond the gatherings and how rainbow affects them over time. And 3. Qualitative and quantitative analysis of rainbow websites created by and for the rainbow family, treating the internet not just as a source of texts, but as an additional field site where the movement expresses itself and maintains connections. She argues that because rainbow gatherings are temporary, mobile, and lack a fixed location, classic one village, one long stay anthropology is not enough. Instead, she adopts a multi-sited, postmodern ethnographic approach that follows the phenomenon across places, different gatherings, and media, physical camp and online space, allowing her to see rainbow not as a closed, exotic tribe, but as a fluid network embedded in wider social contexts. In the literature review on the Rainbow and the New Age movement, the author situates rainbow gatherings inside broader research on New Age spirituality and alternative religious movements. She leans on scholars like Healers, York, Ivakiv and others to show how New Age culture mixes individual spiritual seeking, ecological concern, and anti-institutional attitudes. Within this frame, rainbow is presented as a New Age-style phenomenon that combines nature mysticism, anti-capitalist critique, and a loose, global network structure rather than a formal organization. The author proposes to extend existing work, such as Ivakiv and Tavori and Goodman, by looking not only at beliefs and symbols, but at concrete practices of community building, how people at Rainbow actually live, cooperate, and create a sense of tribe in the here and now. In Individual Freedom and Social Order in the Rainbow Gatherings, she turns to classic sociological debates about how social order is possible when individuals are supposedly free and self-interested. Using quotes from rainbow texts like "We have no leaders, we are each our own leader," she highlights the movement's claim to be a leaderless, rule-less community where the only law is respect everyone who is different from you. This clashes with much of the theoretical literature, which assumes a tension between personal freedom and collective solidarity. Rainbow should, in theory, collapse into chaos, but in reality it runs on shared kitchens, clean water, daily chores, and coordinated rituals. The author poses the central puzzle that will guide the empirical chapters. How is social order produced in a space that rejects formal authority and written rules? She sets up 2 main explanatory paths: social control, sanctions, pressure, norms, and solidarity, emotional bonds and shared meaning. and signals that the rest of the thesis will test how well these theories actually fit what happens on the ground at rainbow gatherings. Chapter 1 looks at how rainbow gatherings run in practice when no one is in charge and shows that most of what keeps the gathering going comes from individuals freely choosing to do things that serve collective needs. First, in Food at the Gatherings, the author describes how hundreds of people manage to eat twice a day in the forest without a kitchen staff, money, or fixed schedule. Food is cooked in communal kitchens and served at the food circle by the main fire, where everyone sits together and shares a simple vegetarian meal. There is no exact clock time. Instead, people are called by shouting "food circle" from the kitchen area once the food is nearly ready, and they slowly gather until most are present before starting a short opening ritual and then serving the food. This shows how a big, complex task, feeding a camp, gets done through flexible voluntary coordination rather than formal organization. In Money at the Gatherings, the chapter explains the role of the magic hat, a central rainbow institution. Instead of paying for meals, people pass a hat around the circle and donate whatever they feel like, or nothing at all, and that money is used to buy food for everyone. Participants often talk about the hat as magical because there is always enough in it, and they are proud that the system works without control or punishment. The author gives an example of a woman who puts in a lot of money, saying she is doing it partly for a friend with a child who has no money, and for others who also don't have. When asked if it bothers her that some give nothing, she answers that everyone gives what they can, suggesting an informal norm of fairness. People feel responsible to cover for others when they can. In Rainbow Time and Doing Chores, the author describes a totally different sense of time, called Rainbow Time. Events are scheduled not by clock hours, but by references like 1 hour after food circle, and in practice that hour can mean anything from half an hour to 2 hours, depending on when people naturally drift over. Despite the looseness, chores do get done. People volunteer to cook, carry water, wash pots, dig latrines, clean, and build structures. There is no work roster or boss. Instead, tasks are posted informally or announced, and whoever feels like it shows up. Over time, certain people tend to take responsibility for key jobs, but officially everyone remains their own leader, and work is framed as a free gift to the family rather than an obligation. The chapter summary pulls these threads together. Rainbow gatherings maintain crucial collective functions, feeding everyone, funding food, keeping the camp clean and running, through personal choices rather than rules, wages, or coercion. People cook, give money, and do chores because it feels meaningful, because they identify with the family, and because they trust others will also contribute in their own way. The author argues that this creates a kind of utopian balance, a working social order with a very high level of individual autonomy. At the same time, she hints that this balance is fragile and dependent on a specific context, short-term, idealistic, mostly voluntary participants, setting up the next chapters, which ask whether this order can be explained by classic ideas of social control or by solidarity. Chapter 2 begins by laying out classic sociological definitions of social control, emphasizing that most theorists see it as organized responses to deviant behavior, responses that include rules, prohibitions, accusations, and punishments. The chapter cites Donald Black's framing of social control as the normative aspect of social life, and the official response to deviance, and Stanley Cohen's influential definition of social control as formal, organized reactions to wrongdoing. The author highlights two key features these definitions share. 1. Social control must involve a response to deviance, and 2. It must have an organized, institutional basis, some authority or accepted structure enforcing norms. Using these definitions as a yardstick, the author examines whether rainbow gatherings have the elements needed for true social control. She notes that at face value, rainbow appears to have no rules, no formal institutions, no enforcing body, and no penalties. There is no list of rules that belongs to the movement, no enforcing or punishing body. Not even regarding money in the magic hat. Because the gatherings openly reject hierarchy and authority, they lack what theorists call organized control. Given this absence, the author investigates whether informal, unstructured forms of regulation exist, and whether they are powerful enough to explain how order is maintained. The chapter finds that although the rainbow ideology insists on total freedom and no leaders, there are instances of informal social pressure and conflict resolution. Participants sometimes intervene verbally when someone behaves aggressively or violates community values. People may use techniques like gentle correction, withdrawal of attention, group discussions, or conflict-diffusing rituals. However, the author stresses that these responses are weak, inconsistent, and uncoordinated, lacking the institutional backing that classical social control theory requires. As summarized in the chapter's theoretical framing, the gatherings contain elements of social control, but they are too weak and unorganized to explain the social order that occurs in them. The chapter concludes that social control cannot fully account for the harmony and cooperation observed at Rainbow. Since participants reject institutional authority, and since informal sanctions are too soft and irregular to regulate a temporary society of hundreds, the author argues that another mechanism must be responsible for the peaceful, functional order of the gatherings. This sets the stage for the next chapter, where she turns to solidarity as an alternative explanation. Social control, she argues, exists, but not in a form strong enough to explain how the rainbow community stays cohesive, safe, and orderly over time. Chapter 3 asks whether solidarity, the feeling of we-ness, warmth, and mutual support, can explain why rainbow gatherings stay so harmonious even without strong rules or leadership. Drawing on Durkheim, the author notes that classic theory sees solidarity as a function of two things: how much the group demands of its members, and how committed people are to meeting those demands. In normal communities, you get strong solidarity when there are clear expectations and strong obligations. But at Rainbow, the collective hardly demands anything. There are no binding rules, no formal duties, no punishment for not working or not donating money. Yet people still behave as if they are part of a tightly knit community. This tension is the starting point of the chapter. The author then shows, using testimonies and web texts, that participants really do experience intense solidarity. People describe the gathering as becoming family and tribe for the time they're there, strangers putting aside their separateness and uniting. They talk about the camp as a womb of an imagined community where you can rely on everyone, recharge with warmth, and be taken care of if you get sick. One quoted Rainbow member describes returning to the city, feeling the armor he usually wears against stress and hostility, and longing to escape Babylon back to the gathering, which he calls one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. These accounts show that, at the level of lived experience, people truly feel deep solidarity and emotional safety. Next, the chapter looks at rituals and symbols that produce this solidarity. A key example is the hand-holding circle before the shared meal. Everyone stands around the main fire, holding hands in a precise way. Each person both gives and receives with their two hands, embodying the ideal that every individual takes from the community and also gives back. The circular shape symbolizes equality and unity. The author also highlights the language of Rainbow family, and the greeting "Welcome home" at the entrance to the gathering, as everyday reinforcements of a family-like bond. Drawing on Victor Turner's idea of communitas, she suggests that Rainbow creates a temporary, almost sacred state of togetherness that suspends normal social hierarchies and distances. However, the author argues that existing theories of how solidarity is built don't fit Rainbow's conditions. Many classic models assume stable, long-term structures, villages, workplaces, religious institutions, where people repeatedly interact, depend on each other economically, and face sanctions if they don't conform. By contrast, Rainbow is short-term, voluntary, and non-coercive. People can leave any time. They don't share long-term obligations, and the movement avoids formal authority. The author therefore claims that while we can clearly say there is solidarity at the gatherings, the usual explanations of how such solidarity is created do not align with the conditions that exist at the Rainbow gatherings. The chapter's key move is to flip the usual causal direction. Instead of treating solidarity as a tool that the community uses to maintain social order, the author suggests that at Rainbow, solidarity is the very reason people come. In her words, the solidarity at the gatherings should be seen not as the tool to create social order, but as the reason for it. The gathering itself is the focal point of a touristic or pilgrimage-like journey, whose main purpose is to experience an intimate, supportive community that no longer exists in everyday industrial, postmodern Western life. In other words, people don't accidentally stumble into solidarity while doing something else. Seeking that intense feeling of home, tribe, and warmth is the main attraction. Finally, the chapter sets up the continuation of the argument in later chapters. Rainbow solidarity is powerful but fragile and deeply tied to temporariness. The gathering is a bubble, a rainbowist bubble in time and space where people come to unite and to recharge, to be family and tribe. Precisely because it is temporary, it can remain flexible and non-demanding, avoiding the hardening into rigid structures and heavy obligations that would eventually erode individual freedom. Chapter 3 therefore concludes that solidarity at Rainbow is real and intense, but it is better understood as a sought-after emotional experience, the home people travel to, rather than as a conventional mechanism of control or discipline. Chapter 4 develops the argument that the Rainbow gathering creates a shared, collective good, a meaningful communal experience, through the voluntary actions of rational, self-directed individuals. Instead of relying on formal rules, authority, or enforced cooperation, the gatherings work because individuals are motivated by symbolic narratives, spiritual ideals, and a desire for belonging. The author frames Rainbow as a place where people contribute freely, cooking, donating, participating, teaching, healing, because the experience itself is valuable to them. The chapter therefore explores the symbolic, spiritual, and emotional forces that attract individuals and encourage them to act in ways that serve the whole community. The first section describes the mythology surrounding the Rainbow family, especially the widely circulated Hopi prophecy. According to the story, retold on Rainbow websites worldwide, when the earth becomes polluted and humanity loses its way, a group of people from all colors, backgrounds, and nations will rise and heal the planet, the warriors of the rainbow. This prophecy is often treated as part historical, part spiritual truth within the movement. The chapter emphasizes that the prophecy functions as a foundational myth, giving participants a sense of purpose and destiny. Even though the Hopi themselves have disavowed the prophecy, Rainbow members circulate it enthusiastically. The myth helps individuals feel they are part of something ancient, global, and meaningful, motivating them to act collectively even without formal rules. The chapter then examines Rainbow's ecological worldview. Participants consistently describe nature as sacred, and use the figure of Mother Earth as a spiritual center. Living in the forest, drinking spring water, cooking over fire, and sleeping outdoors are not just practical choices, they are symbolic acts meant to reconnect participants with the earth. The author shows that this ecological spirituality forms a moral framework, caring for nature, picking up trash, avoiding chemicals, and respecting the land become self-imposed obligations. People behave cooperatively because they see themselves as protectors of Mother Earth. This shared eco-spiritual narrative motivates individuals to act in ways that sustain the camp environment. The third and fourth sections focus on the power of welcome home, the signature Rainbow greeting. From the moment newcomers arrive, strangers embrace them and say, "Welcome home, brother/sister." This simple phrase creates an immediate emotional bond and frames the gathering as a return to a loving, accepting family. The author argues that this greeting is not superficial, it is a social technology that transforms isolated individuals into members of a caring community. Rituals such as the food circle, singing, drumming, shared silence, and hand-holding reinforce this sense of unity. The chapter shows that the real attraction of Rainbow is not the ideology, but the experience of unconditional acceptance, warmth, and collective presence. People contribute to the community because they feel deeply connected to it. The chapter concludes that Rainbow's social order emerges from a combination of mythology, spiritual ecology, and effective rituals, which together generate a powerful sense of meaning and belonging. Individuals voluntarily perform tasks that sustain the gathering because doing so enhances the shared communal experience they came to seek. In classical sociological terms, Rainbow achieves a collective good, a functioning, supportive, egalitarian community, without coercion, hierarchy, or strict rules. The chapter argues that this outcome is not irrational, but actually rests on a consistent internal logic. People act for the common good because it directly produces the kind of emotional, spiritual, and communal environment they value. The gathering thus becomes a postmodern tribe, maintained by personal motivation rather than formal structure. Chapter 5 reframes rainbow gatherings through the lens of tourism and pilgrimage theory, arguing that participants treat the gathering as a site they travel to in order to experience a rare form of intimacy and communal warmth. Drawing on ideas from Urry and other scholars of tourism, the chapter suggests that rainbow functions much like a pilgrimage destination, not because it's tied to institutional religion, but because people undertake a physical journey to reach a symbolically charged place, where they hope to have a transformative experience. What makes rainbow distinctive is that the sacred center is not a holy relic, temple, or ritual lineage, it is the communal experience itself. The author emphasizes that the physical journey to the gathering, often long, inconvenient, and demanding, is integral to the experience, not incidental. Rainbow sites are intentionally remote, difficult to access, and disconnected from conventional infrastructure. People hike for hours, carry gear on their backs, pass through forests, and gradually leave Babylon, the outside world, behind. This challenging journey mirrors classic pilgrimage patterns: separation from the everyday world, movement through a liminal zone, and entry into a symbolic home. Reaching the camp after such effort intensifies the emotional impact of being greeted with welcome home, making the arrival feel like crossing a threshold into a different social reality. Drawing implicitly on Victor Turner's concepts, the chapter describes the gathering as a liminal space, a place outside normal time, economy, and social expectations. Rainbow suspends many features of everyday life. People sleep outside, abandon clocks, eat in circles, share chores voluntarily, and interact with strangers as if they were family. This suspension of normal social structure creates a condition similar to pilgrimage sanctuaries, a temporary, sacred zone where participants experience communitas, the intense sense of equality, unity, and emotional connection. The chapter argues that this liminality is not accidental, but is a major reason people travel to Rainbow in the first place. Unlike traditional pilgrimage sites centered on a holy site, saint, or doctrine, Rainbow's sacred core is community itself. The author stresses that participants repeatedly express that they come to Rainbow to feel at home, to be family, and to recharge socially and spiritually. This desire for connection is the gathering's strongest attraction. The campfire, the food circle, the singing and drumming, the silent circles, and the shared rituals all serve as mechanisms for heightening the sensation of belonging. The chapter shows that people are drawn, not to specific beliefs or obligations, but to the experience of being enveloped in a warm, supportive, egalitarian collective, something they rarely encounter in modern society. The author connects Rainbow to forms of alternative tourism. Rainbow gathering participants travel, encounter people from around the world, experience new social norms, and immerse themselves in the exotic a temporary tribal camp in the forest. Yet unlike commercial tourism, Rainbow rejects money, consumerism, and spectacle. Participants insist that Rainbow has no organizers, charges no entrance fees, and belongs to everyone. This absence of commercial structure allows Rainbow to present itself as an authentic alternative to mainstream tourism. It also creates an ironic paradox: the more Rainbow denies being a tourist site, the more it functions as one, because travelers come specifically to encounter what they perceive as an authentic communal utopia. The chapter argues that Rainbow combines elements of pilgrimage and counter-pilgrimage. It resembles pilgrimage because people leave their ordinary world, travel to a remote sacred zone, undergo symbolic transformation, and return changed. But it is also anti-pilgrimage because it lacks sacred institutions, priests, doctrine, hierarchy, or obligatory rituals. Participants create their own spiritual experiences freely. The sacred is generated by the group's collective presence, not by an external authority. In this sense, Rainbow is a postmodern pilgrimage, a journey whose meaning is produced internally through emotional solidarity and shared practices rather than externally ordained tradition. Chapter 5 concludes that the Rainbow Gathering functions as a destination for emotional and social renewal. where people come to experience forms of closeness, warmth, and shared humanity that feel absent from everyday Western, industrial, individualistic life. The communal atmosphere, rather than ideology, ritual, or spirituality, stands at the center of attraction. Thus, Rainbow embodies a unique model of pilgrimage, one in which community itself is the holy object, and individuals voluntarily enact behaviors, sharing, cooperating, cooking, participating, because doing so allows them to inhabit, even if briefly, a world where solidarity and belonging feel real. Chapter 6, Group Boundaries of the Rainbow begins by describing the Rainbow Gathering as a physical, place-based community that comes into existence only during the event. For the weeks it exists, the gathering resembles a traditional Gemeinschaft-style village, warm, intimate, cooperative, and rooted in shared daily life. Participants sleep close to one another, cook and eat together, and build the camp collectively, creating the feeling of a tight-knit tribe. Yet this geographical community is radically different from classic villages because it lacks permanence. Its inherent temporariness, the fact that it dissolves completely after the gathering, prevents long-term obligations, internal hierarchies, or stable social structures from forming. This temporariness is crucial. It allows people to experience closeness without the costs or constraints of ongoing membership. Next, the author examines Rainbow as a community based on shared characteristics or identity, and she argues that such a common denominator does not really exist. Participants differ in age, nationality, class, occupation, ideology, and spirituality. Demographics do not unify them. In fact, differences are either ignored or actively minimized. Ideology is also not a reliable unifier. While Rainbow uses New Age language, many participants do not deeply engage with or even believe in these ideologies. When people are asked who is Rainbow, common answers are intentionally vague. Rainbow is everyone, or if someone doesn't know their rainbow, they probably are highlighting extreme openness. This absence of a fixed identity marker means the Rainbow community is boundary blurred, defined more by openness than by any shared trait. The chapter then turns to Rainbow's online presence, showing that the movement also exists as a loose digital network on forums, mailing lists, and video platforms. These sites host discussions, coordination, personal stories, and videos from gatherings around the world. They often appear more structured or organized online than in the forest, creating a paradox. The digital space sometimes constructs a more distinct sense of group identity than participants themselves acknowledge in person. However, many gatherers downplay the importance of the internet in their Rainbow lives, reacting with surprise when asked whether the websites matter. The author notes an interesting dynamic. The people who are most invested in Rainbow ideology are also the ones who contribute most to the online community. This makes the virtual space a partial continuity of the geographical one, maintained by a subset of committed members, but still lacking clear boundaries or formal membership. The chapter concludes that Rainbow combines characteristics of three community types: geographical, common ground, and virtual, yet fully fits none of them. Its geographical form has warmth but no permanence, its common ground form lacks any real unifying trait, its virtual form creates continuity but only for a self-selected minority. What ties all three together is deliberate boundary ambiguity. The Rainbow community manages to stay open to everyone who wants to belong, avoiding clear definitions of who is inside or outside. The author argues that this ambiguity is a key feature of postmodern communities, especially virtual ones, but Rainbow achieves it not through virtuality alone but also through temporality. Because the gathering exists only briefly, its boundaries remain fluid and inclusive. Thus, Rainbow becomes a postmodern, borderless, temporary tribe, a community that persists precisely because it refuses to solidify. The discussion pulls everything together and adds one last, personal layer. The author starts by returning to the big word community. She notes that this thesis has dealt with community because, whether we notice it or not, it is not good for man to be alone. We all need others in our lives. She explains that she tried to understand Rainbow gatherings as a community by looking at them through several classic lenses: social control, solidarity, group boundaries, and the relationship between the individual and the social structure. What she found is a very unusual picture, a community in which there is a strong sense of solidarity and family, an almost ideal social harmony, and at the same time very high individual autonomy, all without formal control mechanisms or clear group boundaries. She then places Rainbow in the wider context of postmodern communities. Following Durkheim and Anderson, she recalls that earlier forms of community were held together by some external unifying force, religion, nation, shared locality, or some clear identity. In contemporary, postmodern conditions, new communities still generally have some common denominator. It might be shallow or temporary, but there is usually a fixed identity or shared interest, however small, that holds people together. By contrast, she argues, what happens at Rainbow is different. In her view, Rainbow participants are a group of people who no longer need an external object to circle around. Instead of orbiting a god, nation, or ideology, they circle around themselves. Rainbow appears to be a community without a substantive common ground, beyond the desire to be in community at all. Next, she points out that, despite all her analysis, one crucial piece was still missing. What happens to the Rainbow family after the gathering ends? She writes that to truly understand Rainbow, we have to ask about the fate of the community after the days of the gathering are over. What happens when the last brothers and sisters put their packs on their backs and head off to the next destination? To answer this, she chooses to tell her own last Rainbow story, describing her departure from the Serbian gathering, how she walked out of the forest, realized that people she had felt so close to barely remembered her, and began to question what, if anything, remained of that family once the camp disappeared. This personal narrative reveals the painful moment when the intense feeling of belonging clashes with the ease with which everyone moves on. From this, she draws her central interpretive conclusion: Rainbow is a community in the form of a bubble. During the gathering, people experience a powerful sense of tribe, warmth, and solidarity. For a short time, strangers truly feel like family. But this solidarity is tightly bound to time and place. When the gathering ends, most of the ties evaporate quickly, there are no continuing obligations, and the family dissolves back into individuals on the road or in Babylon, the outside world. The very features that make Rainbow so attractive, its temporariness, openness, and lack of boundaries, also mean that it cannot become a stable, demanding community in the classical sense. Finally, she links this back to her earlier theoretical claims. Rainbow shows that in the postmodern, industrial, borderless West, people still deeply long for community, but often in a way that avoids long-term commitments. Rainbow gatherings become the focal point of a touristic or pilgrimage journey, whose main purpose is to experience, briefly, an intimate and supportive community that no longer exists in everyday life. Solidarity here is not a tool used by a stable group to maintain order. Rather, solidarity itself is the goal, the reason people come. The discussion closes by presenting Rainbow as a postmodern communal bubble without a common denominator, a place where people travel home to a temporary tribe that is real and intense while it lasts, and almost weightless once it is over. When she writes about the European Rainbow gathering in Serbia, you see it almost like a film shot from her own eyes. She remembers the arrival, a long trip into the wild nature of Serbia, down a slope toward a big circle of strangers. People from all over the world were already gathering for the first meal of the day, when they noticed the new woman coming down the hill. They were not her parents waiting at the door, not a partner welcoming her home after work, but total strangers who opened their arms to her and called out, "Welcome home." In a language that wasn't her own, they pulled her into an intimate hug and whispered in her ear, "Welcome home, sister." This was her threshold moment, the feeling that she had stepped out of ordinary life and into a forest world where strangers behave like family. Once inside, the Serbian camp feels to her like a temporary village or tribe. Paths wind between tents and teepees, all of it surrounded by forest on every side. The isolation from the outside world creates a strong sense of being cut off from civilization. Along the paths you pass named spots that quickly become familiar: the love forest, the central tipi, the kitchen, the shit pits, the shower, the place where people meditate. You know there is always hot tea and music in Chai kitchen. Faces are smiling. People help one another as if they've known each other for years, and everyone calls everyone else brother and sister. Twice a day the whole camp meets around the main fire to eat together in a food circle, with simple rituals that are easy to pick up. The atmosphere, she says, is one of intimacy and shared life. There is a quieter, more fragile scene when she gets sick or depleted during the gathering. A friend points to an old tree and tells her that this tree is very old and has a lot of life force, and that she should hug it and take strength from it. She goes to the old tree, stretches her arms around its trunk, leans her cheek against the rough bark, closes her eyes, and breathes in its smell, feeling it as something alive and strong. By midday she feels well enough to leave the shade of her forest spot and walk out into the blinding light toward the food circle for the first time. On the way, many people stop her to ask how she is feeling and how her illness is. She hadn't expected anyone to remember her or her sickness. Her expectations of these rainbow people were low. When they did remember, it shook her. They had not failed the minimal test of care she had secretly set for them, and this was not the first time this had happened. That surprise pushes her into deeper questions. Who are these people whose arms made me feel safe in the middle of the forest? Who are these strangers who gave me the strength to sing and overcome old fears, even if only for a few moments? She begins to wonder what holds them together, what makes each of them behave as if this were a close community, and what happens to these ties after that magical month in the forests is over. Another very concrete memory is about mobile phones and the pull of the outside world. At the gathering in eastern Serbia, she and many others sometimes climbed up to the top of a hill, far from the main fire and the densest tents, just to find reception. Up there, each person spoke quickly and alone, making hurried phone calls back to Babylon before descending again into the forest camp. Back at the main circle, during one meal, one of the most active participants stood up and asked everyone to turn off their mobile phones and leave them in their bags, saying he didn't want the radiation, and that even a switched-off phone still emits it, so he even recommended removing the battery. Through her eyes you can feel the tension. On the one hand, people sneaking up the hill to call home, on the other hand, a camp that treats modern technology, and especially cell phones, as almost taboo, something to be kept outside the sacred space of the gathering. The end of the Serbian gathering is emotionally complicated. At some point after that magical month in the forests, she walks out of the camp and back toward the bright, ordinary world. The same people who had hugged her, asked about her health, and called her sister become again what they always were, strangers with their own paths. In the weeks and months of readjustment afterward, as she returns to the university corridors, she feels a kind of internal drama, the long, slow acclimatization back to lectures and fluorescent hallways, the shattering of the rainbow dream, and the reassembling of its fragments into theories and models inside her thesis. She later sees that painful process, moving from enchanted participant to critical anthropologist, as a necessary step in understanding both rainbow and the world.